The TurboGrafx 16 is an American institution, like apple pie, baseball, and high fructose corn syrup. Of the 120-ish games that we got on the Turbo, most of them were pretty good, and I enjoy talking about them, but today I want to flip it up and dive into the much larger and more mysterious PC Engine library. These games were meant for the Japanese variant of the console, where they were actually quite popular, and gave Nintendo some meaningful competition for a little while, kinda like how the Sega Genesis did over here in the States. With that success came a wide variety of titles though, and that can make it kinda tough for those of us in the US to pick out the ones that are worth importing. A lot of them just have way too much Japanese text for people who don't know Japanese to enjoy them, or just don't make any sense because of various cultural boundaries. Like, for instance, I don't know anything about Mahjong. Anyway, over the last 10-15 years or so, I've taken enough leaps of faith on eBay and at various gaming conventions to get a pretty good idea of what games are worth bringing over and which ones are not. So today, with a little bit of help from a friend, I want to highlight some PC Engine games that are absolutely worth importing and playing on your PC Engine, or on your TurboGrafx with one of those handy-dandy adapters, or playing by some other means. Gomola Speed is a perfect example of the type of unique little gems that can be found in the PC Engine library if you look hard enough, so let's start with that. Here you control a little segmented caterpillar thing who seems to always be losing his segmented body parts. So each level is centered around collecting those, eating all of the food around, which opens up the exit, and then escaping the level through that. You acquire your body segments by just touching them. The caterpillar seems to eat them and then push them through his body to sprout a new one at the end, which is equal parts funny and kind of disturbing. Eating the food is where the encircling technique comes into play. You encircle the food particles to eat and consume them, and getting them all is the main goal of each level. You need your segments first though, because you need to be long enough in order to do that. And the enemies can make that kind of difficult since they tear off your segments, making you too short and stubby to encircle and eat food, and we can't have that. In theory, you can grab the segments again and keep going, but if an enemy hits your head, then you lose a life and have to restart the stage. So depending on the situation, you may want to just avoid the enemies, grab the food, and get out. Or you may want to take the enemies out if they're too much of a nuisance. You do this primarily by stunning them with bombs that you drop with button 1. These bombs come out of the back end of the caterpillar, so I'll leave your interpretation of what that means to you, but in any case, they blow up after a couple of seconds and stun the enemies in range, and if you're long enough, you can encircle them at that point and take them out. Now, the enemies do respawn after a little while, but it's still worth taking them out in most situations, so you can focus on the food. But the caterpillar also can learn some new abilities along the way. On top of your poop bombs, you also get more straightforward missiles and the occasional hyperstate, which makes you invincible for a short while, and you can stun any enemy you touch while in this state, so definitely keep an eye out for these. This gameplay, as weird as it is surprisingly fun and addictive. Encircling things is a bit tricky to get used to and can get a little bit finicky, especially when food or enemies are up against a wall, but 99% of the time I feel like it works the way it's supposed to. Gomola Speed's biggest strength is probably the sheer variety of level types that never lets the game get stale in any way and keeps putting you in different situations. Some levels are just straight-up mazes that need to be explored and figured out through trial and error, and some feel more like standard stages with keys, locked doors, and a handful of enemies just lurking around. Some are more puzzle-oriented and require you to figure out something to advance, and some levels are just huge open spaces that throw a little bit of everything at you at once. The occasional boss battle also mixes things up well, and they can put up a surprising challenge. So no one level feels out of place, but you never really feel like you've seen it all either. Visually, I feel like the variety is here too, with darker stages that feel more ominous, brighter ones, and some that really just want to flex the color palette of the system. So while no one stage does a whole lot, the game never sticks you with one type of level for very long before switching things up. So as a whole, the game has a good grasp on how to stay engaging, and that's more than I can say for a lot of games from this era. Hell, that's more than I can say for a lot of games now. UPL really knew what they were doing with this one, and clearly knew how to make games for the system, so it's a shame that we didn't get much more from them before they went defunct in 1992. Quick shout out to the music as well. It's not nearly as iconic as many other soundtracks from this library, and probably won't ever make it into anyone's top 10 lists or anything, but it's totally solid. It's strange, it's catchy, and it plays a big part in creating the unique vibe of the game. This tune in particular tends to linger in my mind for days at a time. Gomola Speed is a great game. The simple concepts of collecting body segments, eating food, and dealing with enemies go together really well, despite how strange and unnatural it feels at first. And with the variety of different situations the game throws you in, it evolves more than enough to stay interesting for as long as you want to play it, which, if you're good, will probably be a couple hours or so until you reach the end. A handful of secret areas here and there, and a nifty password system are just icing on the cake. What would a PC Engine video be without a couple of shmups? Well, it'd probably be fine, but I'm including a couple anyway. Rabio Lepus is another one of these PC Engine games that I can't help but be puzzled by it never getting localized for the West. It's not the best shooter on the system by any stretch, but it's certainly better than certain games that did make it over, that will remain nameless. Deep Blue. It's got a lot of personality too, with a robot rabbit character picking up carrots, shooting down a pretty wild assortment of enemies, and rescuing the royal family of Bunnyland. And it gets even better with some pretty interesting music and completely absurd boss designs that I absolutely love. Especially this guy, even though he kinda creeps me out. I like this game. Rabio Lepus is deceptively difficult too. With a main character like this, you'd think there'd be a smooth on-ramp to the tough parts, but nope. This game just kinda throws you to the wolves immediately and rarely lets up. I'd argue it even veers into being kind of unfair on occasion, with certain hazards proving borderline unavoidable if you don't have prior knowledge of them. Also, some enemies just zoom around the screen at speeds several times faster than you can move. And as far as I can tell, there's no way to go any faster. Your speed is your speed, so you can feel a little bit kneecapped sometimes. To be fair though, that's abated at least a little bit by the fact that you have 3 hit points, which can be recovered via carrots, and a pretty generous checkpoint system. And these are comforts that a lot of 16-bit shmups do not give you. But level memorization is still a must. You can't get around it here. Rabio has a couple of other tricks up their sleeves though, with seeker missiles that can be unleashed in little clusters to thin out the enemies, which is actually something you need to do pretty often. Managing your missile ammo and knowing when to launch them is a big part of mastering the game. For me, it mostly just boils down to remembering I have them. You also get occasional invincibility pickups. Some of the locations of the pickups can feel randomized at times. I'm not sure if that's what it is. There might just be a rotating order of them, but in any case, subsequent attempts of levels can feel a little bit different because of that, which is kinda nice. Not sure what to do about the pickups that fall down below the ground though. Maybe I'm missing something here, but I don't know. Rabio also has a little punch that he can do when you're really close to an enemy, which sometimes can bail you out of a sticky situation and sometimes not. So not something to really depend on, but it's a nice little Hail Mary to have in your back pocket. One thing I always look for in a shooter is enemy variety, and this is an area where Rabio Lepus unequivocally falls short. You do get exposed to new enemies in each level, I think, but there's not nearly enough of them to hide the fact that you're often up against things you've seen several times before. I do like a lot of the enemies though. It's quite an eclectic little bunch of designs and behaviors. The developers also clearly put some effort into mixing up the arrangements of these enemies, and since the levels are fairly short and the bosses are legitimately fun, the small enemy roster manages to kind of squeak by, not really drag the game down very much. The level layouts don't do anything terribly interesting, as you've pretty much always got the same structure of a single scrolling foreground layer and a single background layer that scrolls separately, which does look nice, but I wish they had just mixed it up a little bit more at some point. As usual though, the PC Engine color palette makes the levels shine anyway. The later ones actually look better than the initial couple, and I like that. A lot of shooters kind of front-load their best levels and then slump off midway through, but Rabio Lepus just seems to get more colorful and more interesting as it goes. None of these levels are going to knock your socks off, but they're above average, slightly. Rabio Lepus feels like a quintessential hidden gem to me. Sure, it's no air zonk, but the unique blend of quasi-cute-em-up designs, the stern challenge, fun bosses, and that somewhat unique seeker missile element make it stand out pretty well, even among the sea of excellent shooters in this library. If you're interested in knowing what the characters are saying in the little cutscenes, there's even an English patched version that you can find and play, which is cool. Although that does change the title to Rabbit Punch, which I don't like as much. This is also one of the several PC Engine games that you can play on PSN via the Arcade Archives. I haven't tried this version personally, but it's there if you want it. Either way though, I highly recommend this one. I wish Rabio was a little bit faster and the enemies were maybe a little bit more varied, but I always have a good time when I play this, and that's what matters. Speaking of deceptively challenging cutesy games, Squeak is a PC Engine classic that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. I actually initially discovered this one on the Atari Lynx many moons ago, and that was the only version I played for years and years. And I still think that's a great way to play it, but once I got my hands on the PC Engine version, I grew to enjoy it much more. Squeak sort of defies comparisons to other games, but it essentially revolves around roaming the stages, turning blue tiles into pink ones, and taking out enemies and avoiding hazards along the way, which seems simple, but the game quickly and regularly introduces new enemies, new hazards and obstacles, and can become rather complicated at times, especially with the time limits, which don't leave much room for dilly-dallying around. You do get a reset of the clock every time you die though, and tiles that you already hit will stay pink, which is nice. Some tiles aren't readily available though, and need you to teleport to them or meet some other sort of condition to get to them. Some tiles fall apart, some go back and forth from being hazardous to not, some are super slippery, I guess. There's just a lot of things to learn here. Squeak's basic shot is effective enough at taking out enemies, and you can occasionally upgrade that to be even better, but you're not exactly Rambo here. For the most part, you'll be avoiding enemies and planning your movements around them. Again, it's that time limit that keeps the pressure on to stay focused on the tiles. Enemies do get deadlier though, as they move faster, and some even fire back at you, so you're gonna have to dish out some pain sometimes. Squeak is many things, but easy is not one of them. The game never gets notably hard, it's just more difficult than the visuals and gameplay style might lead you to think. I'm not entirely sure what the character Squeak is, or why painting these tiles is somehow a solution to whatever he's trying to do, but I like him. I wish I was as excited about literally anything as he is about just being alive. The graphics in Squeak are simple but lively, maybe even a little overly lively at times. Sometimes there's just so much going on that it can be hard to focus on what you're doing in the moment, but that could just be my ADHD-addled brain, I don't know. It's definitely got a way of pulling your eyes into several directions at once. It's a good-looking game though, even if it does kind of distract from itself in a weird way. The music is similarly bouncy, and I enjoy it for what it is. There's not a whole lot here to chew on in the audio department, but it's okay. It's nothing revolutionary, but it's fine. With an absolute ton of levels, local co-op mode, and even a handful of secrets here and there, I think Squeak is an easy recommendation. It combines puzzle elements with some light shooting and strategy, and tests your reflexes more than you might expect. Plus, just look at him. So for now, I'm going to toss this over to a good friend of mine, without whom a conversation on the PC Engine just doesn't really feel complete, and then I'll come back at the end with one more.
What's up?
I'm Saru.
I just want to give a quick thanks to Johnny for letting me be a part of this video. I've been a big fan of the TurboGrafx and the PC Engine since 1991, so much so that a small team and I even put our game together for the console called FX Unit Yuki. And it's also available for a bunch of other stuff, so if you want to check it out, you can. But enough about me, let's get into some games. First up is Son Son 2, the sequel to a Capcom game first released for arcades back in 1984. Originally, Son Son was a pretty basic continuous scrolling action game where the player shoots projectiles, only coming to a complete stop between the next area where you fight walls of enemies before being able to progress. The gameplay was quite tedious and repetitive, as was typical for games of the era, but a few years later, NEC Avenue, with cooperation by Capcom, would bring us Son Son 2 for the PC Engine in 1989. Gone are the automatic scrolling stages from the original Son Son, as this sequel is more of a standard action platformer, with things like sub-weapons and power-ups. The game feels very different from that of the first game, and that could be attributed to the fact that this game was originally going to be a PC Engine port of the 80s Capcom medieval action arcade game, Black Tiger. But somewhere along the line, NEC and Capcom decided that the game would be reworked to be a Son Son game. Seeing that Black Tiger was a template for Son Son 2 seems to make a lot of sense when you look at how the platforms are laid out. You climb vines in a similar manner, and you have a weapon that extends that is very reminiscent to the game that it derived from. With the game's title being Son Son 2, it implies it's a sequel, but the plot is almost identical to the first game, with the Ox King kidnapping your friends still being a thing here. Personally, I feel like this game is more of a retelling of the source material, but I digress. One thing that I will say about Son Son 2 is that despite its cutesy appearance, it's pretty hard, making it even more similar to Black Tiger, as the game is quite difficult and most of the time you're struggling for resources just to stay alive. It's pretty brutal. The music isn't anything to write home about, but it fits what's happening on screen, although there really isn't a whole lot of variety in these basic compositions. But all that aside, for a game that came out in the 80s, I do feel like Son Son 2 is a fun little action game that you can only play on the PC Engine. And for about $40 or so for a complete copy, I'd say it's worth adding it to your PC Engine collection. Genji Tsushin Agedama. We'll just call it GTA for short, maybe?
I need this right now.
Oh, right. Well, we'll go with Agedama. Anyway, Agedama was part of a mixed media project that includes a manga, an anime adaptation, and this game here that was released by NEC in 1991. So, the story is about a 4th grader named Genji Agedama who attended hero school and was sent to Earth to train, but encounters some crazy rich girl that makes monsters in an easy bake oven, or something, I don't know. The story is pretty dumb, but thankfully the game isn't. Agedama is a side-scrolling infinite runner where you're in control of our titular character, running, jumping, and blasting your way to each of the stages and boss. While the idea sounds pretty basic, the game is very fun. As Agedama, you have an arsenal of projectiles to dispatch enemies with over a dozen different shot variations. The projectile you shoot all depends on how much your power-up meter is charged, and as soon as you fire off, the meter immediately begins to charge back up. So timing will play a big part when it comes to the attacks you use. As some attacks are more effective than others, you also pick up power-ups along the way, increasing the effectiveness of your attacks, with some health drops along the way. Not only is the gameplay fun, but the graphics are bright and vibrant, with some great sprite work and a color palette that's typical with a number of good PC Engine games. The overall sound design in Agedama is also good. All of the sound effects are poppy, and the music is definitely up there in my top chiptune soundtracks for this console. The first stage track is a banger, and the other tunes are variations of it. Let's have a listen. All in all, Genji Tsushin Agedama is a fun game that's very easy to pick up and play for a quick, satisfying gaming session, and for about $50 complete, it's manageable to add it to your PCE game catalog if you so desired. Give it a go! Now, for the last game on my short list is one game that'll definitely bring a smile to your face, and if it doesn't, well, then you're just a hater.
I can't believe how much I hate everything.
Coryoon Child of Dragon is a cute-em-up by Naxat, released in 1991. The story is a simple one, with a big baddie turning our beloved princess into a baby, and Coryoon ain't gonna have none of that. So he sets out to defeat the big bad so that the curse is lifted on his princess, so he could go back to cuddling in that adult princess bosom. If you've played the TG16 game Air Zonk or its PCE counterpart PC Genji, then the gameplay in Coryoon will seem extremely familiar. And that's because the game's designer and programmer worked on Coryoon first, and the game utilizes the same game engine. Coryoon is a typical scrolling shooter as far as game mechanics are concerned, but combine that with extremely colorful and bubbly visuals, fun, fast-paced gameplay, and chiptunes that'll have you humming along, and you've got yourself a game that you'll come back from time to time just for that sugar high. The gameplay is fast-paced, with action never coming to a stop. It even seems this way during boss battles, as the game has continuous parallax scrolling, so it looks like our little dragon friend is always on the move. There are 3 different projectile types that are collected via different colored orbs that are dropped off by storks. Maybe they're eggs? I don't know. The red orb is fire, the blue orb is water, and the yellow orb is lightning, with subsequent orbs of the same color further powering up the same weapon. There are some other power-ups as well, like a bomb that clears enemies on screen, a shield, an option which is a cute little tiny dragon, and the ability to turn into a tiny dragon yourself. As I mentioned earlier, the music is definitely on the catchier side of chiptune music for the PC Engine. Let's have a quick listen. Seasoned players of the shooter genre may find the game to be a bit too easy, but there are definitely parts of the game where the difficulty can ramp up. Losing a life also means losing all of your power-ups, but the game keeps the power-ups coming. If you're able to collect much of the dropped fruit, then you'll keep getting those 1-ups, making the game that much easier. Coryoon is definitely a gem status, but its price tag is about as high as many real precious gems out there, being in the hundreds for a CIB copy. So it really is hard to recommend you go out and buy a copy, but there are definitely other ways to play. With things like Everdrives, Misters, or jailbroken analog duos, there are many other ways to play, so get out there and play this feel-good title any way you can. And that'll do it for me in this video. Thanks again, Johnny, for giving me the airtime, and thank you all for watching. If you're into Japanese retro games, then give my channel a look. Bye-bye for now.
Override is a significant PC Engine game to me for several reasons, one of which is that this is from the same team that made Psycho Chaser, which is another great PC Engine shooter, and it's also one of the few games published to the platform from Data East, who I maintain is one of the great publishers of this era. Unlike the outstanding Bloody Wolf and Silent Debuggers though, Data East didn't bring Override to the TurboGrafx for whatever reason, and we missed out on it. But today is a new day, and that means we all have a chance to play Override, which is one of the greatest 16-bit shmups ever made, in my humble opinion, which is also correct. Like a lot of my favorite shmups, Override doesn't try to reinvent the genre with some kind of gimmick or marketable hook, but instead it just puts up an extremely refined combination of some of the genre's more popular elements. Fantastic graphics, fun weapons, and exceptional diversity across the enemy roster and level designs. The weapon system in particular in Override should be immediately familiar to veterans of the genre, with different colors representing different fire types and several levels of power for each one. Pretty standard, but Override brings a couple of small twists to that formula. For instance, your base weapon never goes away, it just gets supplemented by the additional weapons you collect. These P icons strengthen the base fire, while the colored icons change the secondary fire or upgrade the one you've already got, if you pick up the same color. So it's a really streamlined and elegant way to give you 2 separate weapons that fire simultaneously and have their own upgrade paths. All of the secondary weapons feel great to use and become quite powerful when fully upgraded. Some are better suited for certain situations, of course, especially bosses, but all of them work well. You just gotta adjust your playstyle accordingly. For instance, the horizontal fire from the purple weapon might be a better fit for situations when you're surrounded, while the blue weapon tends to make more sense when you need pinpoint accuracy to hit weak points while staying out of the line of fire yourself. Yellow might be the most effective generally, since you can technically aim it wherever you want, but it requires that little extra bit of brain power to operate it correctly. Again, all of them work well enough in any situation, so it largely comes down to what complements your default playstyle. I tend to use the blue more often than not, but that strong focused green fire is a nice choice when I'm feeling frisky. You lose everything when you die, of course, but the game does mercifully give you 3 hit points, which might seem like a major olive branch, but you'll quickly find out that the difficulty in Override basically necessitates them. The big equalizer here, though, is the charge shot, which has no real limit and does a ton of damage to everything on the screen if you can manage to not fire for several seconds to charge it up. This can make a huge difference when you're trying to claw your way back from losing all of your upgrades, and can also make short work of bosses if you can really master the timing of it. Override also lets you change your speed manually, so it pretty much checks all of the boxes for what makes a good shoot-'em-up, at least for me. The graphics here are generally on par with any of the better-looking shmups on the platform, Turbo or PC Engine. The enemies are detailed, levels are diverse, and the bosses are appropriately large and imposing. Override uses color well and makes every stage and every boss a standout. I'd put this game's visuals right alongside Blazing Lasers and Soldier Blade without any hesitation. Now, the level's backgrounds might not have quite as much razzle-dazzle as those games, but there are a few nice touches, like the rippling lava pools in Stage 2 and the super smooth layering in Stage 3 that keep Override's presentation well above average. Now, the music here isn't as memorable as other Data East games, which I guess might make the soundtrack the game's weakest element, technically, but that's only because everything else is so strong. The tunes here certainly have a nice edge to them that pack a lot of energy, so I like the music overall, even though I'm not listening to it in my car or anything. Some minor gripes that I suppose could be levied here are that the sound effects are a bit too loud for their own good, especially this one. Good lord. And the game is a bit on the shorter side at just 6 or so levels, one of which is mostly just a boss rush leading up to the final battle. I'd always rather a game like this feel too short and leave me wanting more than overstaying its welcome, though. Override is nothing short of outstanding, so even if you're just a casual fan of the genre, you should definitely play it. As long as the PC Engine keeps being this bottomless well of uncharted territory, I'm going to keep talking about hidden gems as long as I keep coming across them. And I think I'm actually aware of enough right now to justify at least one more video, so feel free to let me know if you'd like to see that. And of course, recommend some other PC Engine hidden gems that I've missed or haven't talked about down in the comments so we can all experience the weirdness together. But until then, as always, thanks for watching.